about stuff, and I'd love to be in a space where we were talking more strategically about where we're aiming for in, even 12, 18 months' time, because at the moment, for me, there's just this big black cloud hanging over everything post-April. And that's really hard then for us to translate into leadership in our practice. So that was that. And the only other thing I was going to say was virtual things have their place, but this face-to-face opportunity is really important. And I think we're missing a trick with that. We still, I think, rely on virtual when face-to-face should be in its place. And yes, it takes a bit more travel. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive to have space, but the output from those face-to-face meetups, the opportunity to network with peers, where genuine discussion is had because people can't hide behind cameras or aren't trying to do a million other things whilst they're still sat at their desk, answering the knock at the door, picking up the phone, etc. Is hugely important. So some way of building that back in a more regular way throughout the year, rather than once a year when WSPMA very kindly put on an event like this, would be fantastic. And in particular, I have to say, I think that really, really is important for PLTs going forward. Again, I don't know how everybody else felt about last week, but it was dire. And I can't overstate that. It was awful. And I'm sat there telling my teams, this is really important, we need to learn about this stuff, we're going to do a big organisational development piece over the last quarter of the year, and then I'm falling asleep at my desk trying to pay attention to an awful session. And that's in part because it was a really sensitive subject, and the best way to deal with sensitive subjects is when you're in a room, you can see people's faces and you feel safe to have a conversation, but you do not get that from virtual environments. So, sorry, no questions, but just...
Just to say, I mean, as I say, face-to-face for me is very important. It's one of my own personal downsides to my first year of this job. So I'll take you up on that challenge, both me and Amy and the team. I did hear about the PLT is all I'll say. So I think the word inquest was used in another conversation. But I will see what we can do. And you're right, that kind of goes similar to the primary care style survey feedback. When we do actually get around to sharing all the sort of analysed results with you and talk about what we do next, we should probably do that face to face. It's quite emotive stuff about how people are feeling.
GP. How is the primary care side going to push back against the monolith that is the UHS and the other big trusts, which have huge budgets, huge resources, and basically just say, feed me a lot? It was astonishing to hear that £200 million of winter pressures is going to be put in for this year, but none of it's going to be given to primary care, it's all going to go into other areas.
Well, just looking at the... I will give a quick answer because I can see movements. Yes, and like you, I read about the 200 million and some of the initial local discussion about whether there was any flexibility at all around it. Obviously, I very strongly believe in investing in primary care because that's my job. So I want more resource at my fingertips so I can talk to you about deploying it sensibly, and if you wanted to set up a respiratory hub or if you wanted to do some sort of bring in extra staff or whatever it is, going back to the winter funding, of course that's what I want too. So there's not much I can say about that because that's a national process, and as I said at the beginning of my remarks, there's something about being a middleman. But opportunities are always there. We will keep looking for opportunities to be flexible. And then in terms of UHS external end, I mentioned about the partnership and the interface stuff is absolutely at the top of the list. That relationship is probably at the top of that list. Because UHSX is so large, in some ways the conversations with SASH and with, dare I mention it, SCFT feel a bit more tangible. I think UHSX is so big and there's so much going on, that's absolutely a focus area. And also, if we're restructuring and changing as an ICB, part of that is working out what our role is and what is the role of their very significant management too. So they have their own pressures, they're part of the family, but at the same time we need to improve some of the interfaces because they're really dragging down relationships. But yeah, more to come on that.
Thank you so much for a good talk. I hope that you and Hugo are going to be able to stay around at lunchtime.
Yes,
chat to people
I have to hang around and do the West Sussex LMC meeting in a bit, so yeah, I need to go and find a room.
How exciting.
How
That would
exciting.
be lovely. Right you are. Well, thank you so very much. Good night. We've got now the great pleasure to introduce Kate King. Many of you will have heard her speak over the last couple of years. You know that she's a great speaker today. She's come all the way from Manchester to speak to us about the subject of access. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me back. Do you know, when I was here this time last year, it's been a really tough year for me. And I'll probably not tell you too many details about it because it might make me cry, and today's not the day for crying. Because I recently went back to the hospital and they told me that there's no sign of active disease. So I am really, really happy to be here and to be back with you. And I feel a bit emotional actually about being here. But one of the other things when I was doing my slides, I also thought about imposter syndrome. Anybody suffer from imposter syndrome? Lots of nods in the audience. Do you know what I felt really proud about when I was making these slides? MIGPM. And I can't tell you how amazing that feels, that now, because of the IGPM and everything that Joe's done to pull us all together, we now have that recognised body and those letters after our name. So when I'm feeling like I'm a total imposter, I know that I've gone through that process. And Joe said at the very beginning that it was, you know, it's like doing an appraisal. It really is. But it's a bit like you work for a commercial company and you're looking for your bonus. You have to really sell yourself, and that's not what we're good at. So I would absolutely encourage all of you to help you with that imposter syndrome to do your MIGPM because it feels amazing to be part of something. So Joe said that there's this competition between Manchester and Sussex. Now, I'm not a really competitive person. But I think if you want to be in competition with somebody, it's Lincolnshire that you need to be in competition with. Manchester haven't funded in the same way that's been funded here. Lincolnshire have. They're your people. And they've done it through one cohort so far, and they've got 20 people through in one cohort. You've had the money for a year. You need to kick, excuse me, we're being videoed, kick Lincolnshire. That's definitely what you need to do. So, what else has happened in the last year? Some great things that I'd totally forgotten about. How could I have forgotten that I turned up in a bright coloured dress when everyone else was wearing black last year? The Queen had died. But I've moved practices. So I've now gone to a city centre Manchester practice, and it is totally different. And it's thrown all my social media, nice, happy family out. Because people are now saying, I don't go on Instagram, I go on Threads. And to me, Threads is something that is to do with coils. And I don't want to get involved in that really. So we're with this really young population that I don't quite understand because I'm having to colour the greys in my hair. So imposter syndrome is here and live with me because I'm going to talk about still my view of social media, and I still think it can offer us something, but I'm not sure it can add any capacity. But and I'll pick up on something that was said earlier on about want and need. And what I hope with good social media channels it can do, it can help people find what they need, which is not what they want, which is always a GP. So let's see if I can make this work and not give Oscar any more nightmares. Yeah, I'm pressing the right one. Don't turn me off. Oh, that's better. Thank you. Here we go. Anybody had their birthday on the 23rd of August? Wedding anniversary? Was it a memorable day for anyone? No? Was for this family. So this family, I don't know if you remember reading about it, the first womb transplant in the UK. Amazing. Can you imagine that family? A sister giving her womb to a sister so she could have a family? Incredible. I was listening to this on the BBC News, and while I was listening, I multitask all the time. You've probably seen me sat here today listening, writing stuff, scrolling. I was looking at Facebook, and I am a bit addicted to other practices' Facebook pages. And this is what was on another practice. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to read it, so I'm just going to read out what Jeff said. What happened to the days not so long ago when the receptionist had a big diary on the desk? I'm just going to do an impression of the big diary for any of you as old as me. Remember it? Massive, great big desk. That company must have gone out of business, whoever made those big diaries. So had a big diary on the desk, and you could call in or telephone and ask for an appointment next Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and the receptionist would write it in the diary with a cheery smile and give you a card with a handwritten appointment on it. I can't understand why something so simple can now be so difficult. So, the practice manager responded, and I love this response. So, in the good old days, we had 5,000 patients, a few doctors and nurses, a few admin staff. Patients used to come to the doctor on average 4 times a year. We now have 13,000 patients, 11 doctors, 8 advanced practitioners, 6 nurses, 3 HCAs, 7 care coordinators, and a partridge in a pear tree. Isn't it? Yeah. We've got all of this stuff, and yet we've still got people saying we can't get to see a GP. We don't want them to see a GP, do we? We've got all of these professionals. But what we're really rubbish at is explaining what all those professionals do and why any GP would say to you, actually, I'm not that good at MSK stuff. What I'd really like is for that patient to go and see the physiotherapist, because they're the experts. So I think we've got to get better at that. And while we're waiting for those campaigns to come, and I understand NHS England are doing one about the different roles in general practice, the IGPM, we've certainly got one that's coming out in the autumn. We have the power to do this on our social media platforms. So, oh, I've been turned off again. We must have, yeah, that's great. So, let's think about an example. So we've got Mary. And if Mary had a decision to make about what happened at her practice, where would she go for information? Who could help? So let's have a listen. Would you mind having a listen? I think I've gone a bit too far, actually, to be honest. Can we go back a slide? If I go back. Oh yeah, it's doing it now. So, Mary's woken up with a runny nose. I don't know if you can read all this. Can you read it at the back? You're right looking at the side? Yeah? So, what's she going to do with her runny nose? Is she going to go, just like probably many of you, leave it? Get on with it for a few days? Or is she going to go onto Google and decide she's got brain tumour? Because it sounds a bit like the symptoms. And, you know, there'll be somewhere in the middle. We'll all be a bit Mary and, you know, choose one of those things. But I had a look on practices about what they were suggesting about hay fever. That's why, because I'm pointing it here, not at you. In the wrong pointy place. It's gone completely now, Oscar.
Yep. Let's talk about therapy. I've been using BetterHelp for the last 3-ish months, and to make it...
So this week's responding to your comments is all about allergic rhinitis and hay fever. We've got a comment from Jacob Wong who said, it's that time of the year again. Allergic rhinitis, nasal stuffiness, itchy eyes, basically all hay fever symptoms. I got them. Please, Abraham, make a video to help me. Well, your wish is my command. What are we waiting for? Hit that like button.